Sarah Martinez adjusted her uniform one last time before stepping onto the hot asphalt of Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the tarmac, and she could already feel sweat forming beneath her heavy military jacket. At 24, she was one of the youngest air traffic control specialists assigned to what everyone called the most boring job on base, directing routine cargo flights and occasional passenger planes to their designated parking spots. Her assignment to tarmac duty felt like punishment, though she couldn't figure out what she had done wrong. Just 6 months earlier, she had graduated top of her class from air traffic control school at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi. Her instructors had praised her quick thinking and exceptional spatial awareness. She had dreams of working in the control tower, guiding fighter jets through complex maneuvers, or perhaps even landing a coveted position at a major international airport after her service. Instead, she found herself holding orange batons, waving cargo planes toward empty parking spaces like some kind of glorified parking attendant. The other airmen joked that tarmac duty was where careers went to die, a place where the military sent people they wanted to forget about. Sarah tried to maintain her positive attitude, but each day felt longer than the last. The base was unusually quiet that Tuesday morning. Most of the regular cargo flights had been delayed due to weather conditions over the Atlantic, leaving Sarah with little to do except stand in the designated marshalling area and wait. She watched a maintenance crew work on a nearby C-130 transport plane, their tools clanking rhythmically against the metal fuselage. The sound echoed across the empty runways, creating an almost hypnotic backdrop to her thoughts. Sarah's mind wandered to her childhood in El Paso, Texas, where she had grown up watching planes take off from the nearby airport. Her father, a mechanic at a civilian airfield, had first introduced her to aviation when she was just 8 years old. He would take her to work on weekends, letting her sit in the control tower while he performed routine maintenance on small aircraft. Those early experiences had sparked her fascination with flight and her eventual decision to join the Air Force. Her radio crackled to life, interrupting her memories. Control tower was notifying her of an incoming VIP transport, a modified Boeing 737, carrying what they described as distinguished passengers for a brief stopover before continuing to Washington, D.C. Sarah straightened her posture and checked her equipment. VIP flights were rare at Ramstein, especially ones requiring special handling protocols. As she waited for the aircraft to appear on the horizon, Sarah noticed increased activity around the base. Security personnel were taking positions along the flight line, and several black SUVs had arrived near the terminal building. Whatever was on that incoming plane was clearly important enough to warrant significant attention from base. Command the distinctive whine of jet. Engines grew louder as the Boeing 737 approached the runway. Sarah could see it now, a sleek white aircraft with minimal markings typical of government VIP transports. She raised her batons and prepared to guide it to the designated parking area, a spot that had been specially cleared and marked with additional security barriers. As the plane touched down and began taxiing toward her position, Sarah felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. This was the most significant aircraft she had been assigned to marshal since arriving at Ramstein. She followed her training precisely, using standard hand signals to direct the pilot toward the proper parking position. The engines wound down with a gradual decrease in pitch, and ground crews immediately moved into position to secure the aircraft. The passenger door opened, and a set of mobile stairs was quickly positioned. Sarah maintained her post as protocol required her to stay until the aircraft was completely secured and all passengers had disembarked. She watched as several men in business suits emerged first, clearly security personnel based on their alert posture and the way they scanned the immediate area. Then she saw him, an elderly man with silver hair and a military bearing that remained unmistakable despite his civilian clothes. He moved slowly down the stairs, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, each step calculated and deliberate. There was something familiar about his profile, though Sarah couldn't immediately place where she might have seen him before. The man reached the bottom of the stairs and paused, looking around the flight line with the practiced eye of someone who had spent considerable time on military bases. His gaze swept across the various ground crews and security personnel before settling on Sarah, who was still standing at her marshalling position about 50 feet away. The moment their eyes met, something extraordinary happened. The elderly man's face went completely white, as if he had seen a ghost. His grip on the wooden cane loosened dramatically, and Sarah watched in slow motion as the polished walking stick slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the concrete below. The sound of wood hitting pavement seemed unnaturally loud in the relative quiet of the flight line. For several seconds, the man stood frozen, staring directly at Sarah with an expression of complete shock and disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The security personnel around him immediately noticed his distress and moved closer, their training kicking in as they prepared to assist what they clearly viewed as a medical emergency in progress. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she watched the scene unfold. The man's reaction was so intense and unexpected that she found herself taking an involuntary step forward, her instinct to help overriding her training to maintain her position. She had never seen someone react to her presence with such visible shock, and she couldn't understand what might have triggered such a dramatic response. One of the security agents bent down to retrieve the fallen cane, while another gently placed a hand on the elderly man's elbow, speaking quietly to him in words Sarah couldn't hear from her distance. The man seemed to shake himself back to awareness, accepting his cane with trembling hands while continuing to stare in her direction with an intensity that made her deeply uncomfortable. Base security had also noticed the commotion. A sergeant approached Sarah's position and quietly asked if she recognized the passenger or had any previous contact with him. Sarah shook her head, explaining that she had never seen the man before in her life. The sergeant made notes on his clipboard and radioed the information back to his command post, following standard security protocols for any unusual incidents involving VIP passengers. Meanwhile, the elderly man had begun walking toward the terminal building, but his progress was slow and unsteady. Every few steps he would turn back to look at Sarah, his expression mixing confusion with something that looked almost like recognition. His security detail stayed close, clearly concerned about his physical and mental state after what appeared to be some kind of episode. As the group moved further away, Sarah could hear fragments of urgent conversation between the security personnel. Words like medical attention and delayed schedule drifted across the tarmac. It was obvious that whatever had happened was significant, enough to disrupt carefully planned arrangements for the VIP visit. Sarah remained at her post until the aircraft was completely secured, and the last of the ground crews had finished their work. Her mind raced with questions about the strange encounter. She replayed the moment over and over, trying to understand what she might have done or said to provoke such a reaction. She had been following standard procedures exactly as taught, maintaining proper distance and using appropriate hand signals. When her shift supervisor arrived to relieve her from tarmac duty, Sarah mentioned the incident with the VIP passenger. The supervisor, a master sergeant with 20 years of experience, listened carefully to her account and made additional notes in the daily log. He assured Sarah that she had done nothing wrong and that passenger reactions, while unusual, were not unheard of when dealing with high-stress travel situations. That evening in the dormitory, Sarah found it difficult to concentrate on anything else. Her roommate, an aircraft maintenance specialist named Jessica, noticed her distracted state and asked what was bothering her. Sarah described the day's events, including the mysterious passenger's dramatic reaction to seeing her on the tarmac. Jessica suggested that perhaps the elderly man had confused Sarah with someone else, possibly a family member or someone from his past. Such cases of mistaken identity weren't uncommon, especially among older individuals who might be dealing with stress or health issues. The explanation seemed logical, but something about the intensity of the man's reaction suggested it was more than simple confusion. Before going to sleep that night, Sarah stood in front of the small mirror in her room, studying her own reflection carefully. She examined her features, wondering what the stranger might have seen that had caused such a powerful response. Her dark hair was regulation length, her brown eyes unremarkable, and her overall appearance seemed entirely ordinary to her own critical assessment. She thought about her family history, particularly her father's side, which had always been somewhat mysterious. Her paternal grandfather had died before she was born, and her father rarely spoke about his own childhood or family background. There had always been gaps in the family stories, periods of time that seemed to be deliberately avoided in conversation. As Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that the day's events were connected to something larger than a simple case of mistaken identity. The elderly man's reaction had been too intense, too specific, and too focused to be explained away as confusion or medical distress. Something about her presence had triggered a profound response, and she was determined to understand what it might have been. The next morning brought unexpected news that would change everything. Sarah was summoned to the base commander's office, a place she had never been and never expected to visit during her routine assignment. The administrative assistant who delivered the message provided no details, only that Colonel Henderson wanted to see her immediately after her scheduled shift. Walking across the base toward the command building, Sarah's mind filled with worry. She mentally reviewed every aspect of her recent performance, searching for any mistakes that might have prompted official attention. Her tarmac duties had been routine and error-free. Her uniform and appearance were always regulation standard, and she had never received any complaints or negative feedback from supervisors. The command building itself was impressive. A modern structure that housed the senior leadership responsible for one of the most important Air Force installations in Europe. Sarah had only seen it from a distance during her initial base orientation tour. Now, as she approached the main entrance, she felt increasingly nervous about whatever awaited her inside. Colonel Henderson's office was located on the second floor, behind a door marked with official insignia and security warnings. Sarah knocked twice and waited for permission to enter. When the colonel called out, she stepped inside and immediately came to attention, delivering a crisp salute as required by military protocol for junior personnel meeting senior officers. The colonel was a woman in her mid-50s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of Sarah's appearance and demeanor. She returned the salute and gestured for Sarah to take a seat in the chair positioned in front of her large wooden desk. The office walls were covered with photographs, certificates, and military memorabilia from what was clearly a distinguished career. To Sarah's surprise, Colonel Henderson began the conversation with questions about her family background and personal history. She asked about Sarah's parents, her childhood in Texas, and particularly about her paternal grandfather. Sarah answered as completely as possible, though she had to admit that her knowledge of her grandfather was limited to a few basic facts her father had shared over the years. The colonel seemed particularly interested in Sarah's grandfather's military service. Sarah knew that he had served in the Army during World War II, but the details were vague. Her father had always been reluctant to discuss that period of family history, usually changing the subject when Sarah asked questions about her grandfather's war experiences or the circumstances of his death. Colonel Henderson opened a manila folder that had been sitting on her desk and removed several documents and photographs. She turned the folder around so Sarah could see its contents, and what she saw there made her breath catch in her throat. The top photograph showed a young soldier in World War II-era uniform, and the facial features were unmistakably similar to her own. The soldier in the photograph was identified as Sergeant Miguel Martinez, Sarah's grandfather, who had served with distinction in the European Theater of Operations. According to the documents, he had been awarded several commendations for bravery and had participated in some of the most significant battles of the war, including the liberation of concentration camps in Germany. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Colonel Henderson explained that the elderly man who had reacted so dramatically to seeing Sarah the previous day was retired General Robert Thornton, a decorated veteran who had also served in World War II. According to the information the colonel had received, General Thornton had specifically requested to meet with Sarah after learning about the incident on the tarmac. The general, it seemed, had recognized something in Sarah that connected to memories from his wartime service. He had spent the previous evening making phone calls to various military archives and personnel offices, trying to verify a suspicion that had been triggered by seeing her. His investigation had led him to the conclusion that Sarah might be related to someone he had known during the war. Colonel Henderson went on to explain that General Thornton had served as a young lieutenant in the same unit as Sarah's grandfather during the final months of the war in Europe. They had been part of a specialized reconnaissance team that had operated behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and assisting with the liberation of prisoner of war camps and concentration camps. According to the general's account, Sergeant Martinez had saved his life during a dangerous mission near the German border in early 1945. The two men had formed a close friendship during their service together, but they had lost contact after the war ended, and troops were reassigned to different duties. General Thornton had often wondered what had happened to the brave sergeant who had risked everything to pull him to safety during an enemy ambush. Sarah listened to this information with growing amazement and emotion. The grandfather she had never known was being described as a war hero, whose actions had saved the life of someone who had gone on to become one of the highest-ranking officers in the military. The connection explained the general's shock at seeing her. The family resemblance must have been strong enough to trigger immediate recognition and powerful memories. Colonel Henderson concluded by explaining that General Thornton had requested permission to meet with Sarah privately to share his memories of her grandfather and to express his gratitude to the family of the man who had saved his life. The meeting would be entirely voluntary, but the colonel recommended that Sarah consider accepting the opportunity to learn more about her family history and her grandfather's service to the country. As Sarah left the colonel's office with a scheduled meeting time for the next day, her mind was spinning with the implications of what she had learned. The boring assignment to tarmac duty had led to an incredible discovery about her family's military heritage and a connection to living history that she never could have imagined. The meeting with General Thornton was arranged for the following afternoon in a quiet conference room at the Base Officers Club. Sarah spent the morning trying to focus on her regular duties, but her mind kept wandering to the upcoming encounter. She had called her father the previous evening to tell him about the discovery, and his reaction had been surprisingly emotional. For the first time in her life, she heard him crying over the phone as he processed the news about his father's wartime heroism. Her father had revealed that he had indeed known more about his father's military service than he had ever shared. The reason for his silence, he explained, was that the memories were too painful to discuss. Sarah's grandfather had returned from the war a changed man, struggling with what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. He had died in an automobile accident when Sarah's father was only 12 years old, leaving behind many unanswered questions about his experiences overseas. When Sarah arrived at the officers' club that afternoon, she found General Thornton waiting in the designated conference room. He appeared much more composed than he had been on the tarmac, though she could see the emotion in his eyes as she entered the room. He stood up slowly, using his cane for support, and extended his hand in greeting with a warm but trembling smile. The general began by apologizing for his reaction during their first encounter. He explained that seeing Sarah had been like stepping back in time, as her resemblance to her grandfather was remarkable. He had spent 60 years carrying memories of Miguel Martinez, wondering about his fate, and wishing he could somehow express his gratitude to the family of the man who had saved his life. General Thornton opened a leather portfolio that contained photographs, letters, and official documents from his wartime service. The first photograph he showed Sarah depicted two young soldiers standing together in front of a damaged German building. One was clearly her grandfather, looking remarkably similar to the man she had seen in Colonel Henderson's office. The other was a much younger version of General Thornton, barely recognizable as the same person. The general's voice became softer as he began to tell the story of their friendship. He described how Sergeant Martinez had taken him under his wing when he arrived as a green lieutenant, fresh from officer training and completely unprepared for the realities of combat. Miguel had taught him how to stay alive in dangerous situations, sharing hard-earned wisdom about reading enemy movements and surviving behind enemy lines. The mission that had created their lasting bond had taken place in March 1945, near a small German town that was heavily defended by desperate enemy forces. Their reconnaissance team had been tasked with gathering intelligence about German troop movements in preparation for a major Allied advance. The mission had gone wrong when they were discovered by an enemy patrol, leading to a fierce firefight in which Lieutenant Thornton had been wounded and pinned down by machine gun fire. General Thornton's voice broke slightly as he described how Sergeant Martinez had crawled through enemy fire to reach his position, then carried him to safety despite the obvious danger to himself. Miguel had been wounded in the process, taking shrapnel in his shoulder and leg, but he had refused medical attention until he was certain that his lieutenant was safely behind Allied lines. The general showed Sarah a letter that Miguel had written to his wife during his recovery in a military hospital. The letter, which had somehow made its way into official files, spoke of his love for his family and his hope to return home to help raise his young son. Reading her grandfather's words, written in careful handwriting on military stationery, brought tears to Sarah's eyes as she realized she was connecting with him across the decades. General Thornton went on to explain that their unit had been broken up shortly after the mission, with different members being reassigned to various duties as the war approached its end. He had tried to stay in contact with Miguel, but the chaos of post-war military reorganization had made communication difficult. By the time he had established enough seniority to conduct a proper search, Miguel had already returned to civilian life and proven impossible to locate. The general had carried guilt about losing touch with the man who had saved his life. Throughout his subsequent military career, which had included service in Korea, Vietnam, and various peacetime assignments around the world, he had periodically attempted to find Miguel Martinez or his family. The common nature of the surname and the lack of comprehensive military databases in earlier decades had made these searches unsuccessful. As their conversation continued, General Thornton shared stories about Miguel's character and personality. He described him as a natural leader who cared deeply about the welfare of his fellow soldiers. Miguel had been known for his quick thinking under pressure and his ability to remain calm in dangerous situations. He had also been fiercely protective of younger soldiers, often going without sleep to ensure that newer members of their unit were properly trained and equipped. The general presented Sarah with a small wooden box that contained Miguel's military decorations, including a Bronze Star for Valor that had been awarded for his actions during the mission that saved General Thornton's life. The decorations had somehow remained in military archives rather than being sent to the family, and the general had used his influence to have them properly transferred to Sarah, as Miguel's only known descendant, currently serving in the military. As their meeting drew to a close, General Thornton expressed his amazement at the coincidence that had brought Sarah to Ramstein Air Base, just as he was passing through on official business. He spoke of his belief that some things in life happen for reasons beyond human understanding, and that meeting Sarah had provided closure to a chapter of his life that had remained open for 6 decades. In the days following her meeting with General Thornton, Sarah found herself viewing her military service in an entirely different light. The knowledge that her grandfather had been a war hero gave new meaning to her own commitment to serving her country. She began to understand that her assignment to Tarmac duty, which had seemed like a dead-end position, had actually placed her exactly where she needed to be for this remarkable discovery to occur. Word of the extraordinary reunion had spread through the base command structure, and Sarah suddenly found herself receiving attention from senior officers who had previously been unaware of her existence. Colonel Henderson called her in for another meeting to discuss her career goals and potential opportunities for advancement within the Air Force. The colonel explained that exceptional circumstances sometimes created exceptional opportunities for motivated personnel. Sarah's immediate supervisor, Master Sergeant Williams, approached her with news that a position had opened up in the control tower due to an unexpected transfer. The job would require additional training and certification, but it represented exactly the kind of advancement that Sarah had hoped for when she first arrived at Ramstein. The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidental, and Sarah suspected that General Thornton's influence might have played a role in creating the opportunity. The general had remained at Ramstein for several additional days beyond his original schedule, using the time to visit with base historians and help document the story of Miguel Martinez's wartime service. He had also spent hours with Sarah, sharing more detailed accounts of their experiences together, and helping her understand the broader context of her grandfather's contributions to the war effort. During one of these conversations, General Thornton revealed that he had contacted several military historians and veterans organizations to ensure that Miguel's story would be properly preserved. He had arranged for Sarah's grandfather to be posthumously recognized in a memorial database that honored soldiers who had performed acts of heroism but had not received full recognition during their lifetimes. The general also shared a surprising piece of information about his own career. He explained that the leadership skills and courage that Miguel had demonstrated during their wartime service had profoundly influenced his own approach to military leadership throughout his subsequent career. Many of the principles that had guided his decisions as a general could be traced back to lessons learned from watching Sergeant Martinez in action during those dangerous months in 1945. Sarah began to understand that her grandfather's influence had extended far beyond the single act of heroism that had saved General Thornton's life. Through the general's long and distinguished career, Miguel's example had indirectly affected countless other soldiers and military operations. The ripple effects of one man's courage and character had spread across decades and continents in ways that he could never have imagined. General Thornton also revealed that he had established a scholarship fund in Miguel Martinez's name to support education for military families. The fund would provide assistance to children and grandchildren of military personnel who demonstrated academic excellence and a commitment to public service. Sarah would be the first recipient, with funding available for any educational goals she wished to pursue after completing her military service. The connection with General Thornton opened doors that Sarah had never expected to exist. She received invitations to attend veterans, reunions, and military history conferences, where she could learn more about her grandfather's wartime experiences and meet other people who had served during that era. These events provided her with a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made by her grandfather's generation and the lasting impact of their service. One particularly moving experience occurred when Sarah attended a reunion of veterans from her grandfather's original unit. Several elderly men who had served alongside Miguel were still alive, and they shared stories about his character and leadership that had been preserved in their memories for more than 60 years. They described him as someone who had been universally respected and admired by his fellow soldiers, a man who had embodied the best qualities of military service. These veterans also provided Sarah with personal items that had belonged to her grandfather, including a compass that he had carried throughout the war, and a photograph of the entire unit taken just days before the mission that had made him a hero. These tangible connections to her family history became treasures that helped her feel closer to a grandfather she had never had the opportunity to meet. The impact of these discoveries extended beyond Sarah's military career to her personal life as well. She found herself developing a deeper appreciation for family history and a stronger sense of connection to her cultural heritage. She began learning Spanish to better connect with her grandfather's Mexican-American background, and she started researching the experiences of Latino soldiers during World War I. Sarah also discovered that her grandfather's story was part of a larger narrative about the contributions of Mexican-American soldiers to the war effort. Many of these heroes had returned home to face discrimination and limited opportunities, despite their exemplary service to their country. Understanding this historical context helped Sarah appreciate the challenges her grandfather had faced and the strength of character that had enabled him to overcome them. As her time at Ramstein continued, Sarah began to see her military service as part of a family tradition that connected her to something larger than herself. The mundane duties of Tarmac operations took on new significance when she realized that every task, no matter how routine, was an opportunity to honor her grandfather's legacy and contribute to the mission of the United States Air Force. 6 months after her life-changing encounter with General Thornton, Sarah found herself working in the Ramstein Control Tower, directing both military and civilian aircraft through some of the busiest airspace in Europe. The advanced training she had received had challenged her in ways she had never anticipated, but the confidence gained from understanding her family's military heritage had helped her excel in the demanding environment. Her new position required split-second decision-making and constant communication with pilots from around the world. Sarah discovered that she had inherited her grandfather's ability to remain calm under pressure, a trait that served her well during the complex air traffic situations that were routine at such a major installation. Her supervisors quickly recognized her natural talent for the work and began giving her increasingly responsible assignments. General Thornton had maintained regular contact with Sarah throughout this period, serving as an unofficial mentor as she navigated the challenges of her expanding career. His guidance proved invaluable when she was selected to participate in a joint training exercise with NATO partners, an opportunity that would have been impossible without the advanced training she had received. After their initial meeting, the exercise took place at multiple bases across Europe and involved coordinating air traffic for large-scale military operations. Sarah was assigned to work with controllers from Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and several other allied nations, managing the complex logistics of moving hundreds of aircraft across international boundaries. The experience opened her eyes to the global nature of modern military operations and her potential role in supporting international security efforts. During the exercise, Sarah met Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, a career air traffic control officer who had risen through the ranks to become one of the most respected specialists in her field. Colonel Santos took Sarah under her wing, recognizing both her technical skills and her unique family history. The colonel explained that the military was actively seeking officers with Sarah's combination of abilities and background to fill leadership positions in an increasingly complex operational environment. Colonel Santos encouraged Sarah to consider applying for officer training school after completing her current enlistment. She explained that officers with specialized technical skills were essential for managing the sophisticated air traffic control systems that would be implemented in coming years. The colonel also mentioned that Sarah's personal story and family military heritage would make her an ideal candidate for positions that required representing the Air Force at public events and in community outreach programs. The suggestion of becoming an officer represented a dramatic shift in Sarah's career plans. When she had first enlisted, she had viewed military service as a temporary adventure before pursuing civilian career opportunities. Now she found herself considering a long-term commitment to the Air Force and the possibility of following in her grandfather's footsteps by making the military her primary career focus. And Sarah discussed these opportunities with General Thornton during one of their regular phone conversations. The general strongly encouraged her to pursue officer training, explaining that the military needed leaders who understood both the technical aspects of their roles and the deeper significance of military service. He offered to provide letters of recommendation and to use his extensive network of contacts to help support her application. The general also shared his belief that Sarah had the potential to become exactly the kind of leader that the military would need in the 21st century. He described her as someone who combined technical competence with a strong sense of purpose and a deep appreciation for military traditions. These qualities, he explained, were essential for officers who would be responsible for training and leading the next generation of military personnel. As Sarah prepared her application for officer training school, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that seemingly routine day when she had been assigned to marshal an incoming VIP aircraft. What had appeared to be a minor duty assignment had led to discoveries that had transformed her understanding of herself, her family, and her potential future in the military. She began to appreciate that seemingly insignificant moments could have profound consequences, and that being open to unexpected opportunities was essential for personal and professional growth. The chance encounter with General Thornton had demonstrated that life often provides exactly the experiences needed for individual development, even when those experiences come in unexpected forms. Sarah's relationship with her father had also deepened significantly as a result of these discoveries. Her father had begun sharing more family stories and had started his own research into his father's military service. He had visited several World War II museums and historical sites, finally processing emotions about his father's death that he had suppressed for decades. The healing that had occurred in her family relationships reinforced Sarah's growing belief that her military service was about more than personal career advancement. She began to understand that honoring her grandfather's legacy required her to embody the same commitment to service and sacrifice that had characterized his wartime experiences. As she submitted her application for officer training school, Sarah included an essay about her grandfather's influence on her decision to pursue a military career. She wrote about the importance of understanding family history and the ways that previous generations' experiences can provide guidance for contemporary challenges. She also emphasized her commitment to maintaining the highest standards of military professionalism and her desire to serve as a positive example for other young people considering military service. 2 years later, Second Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood on the stage at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, receiving her commission as a newly graduated officer from the Air Force Academy's accelerated program. In the audience sat General Thornton, now using a wheelchair but still maintaining the dignified bearing that had characterized his entire military career. Next to him sat her father, wearing his best suit and carrying a framed photograph of his father in his World War II uniform. The ceremony represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with a chance assignment to tarmac duty and a mysterious passenger's dramatic reaction to seeing her face. Sarah's exceptional performance during officer training had earned her recognition as a distinguished graduate, and she had been selected for immediate assignment to one of the Air Force's most prestigious air traffic control facilities. Her new position would be at Andrews Air Force Base near Washington, D.C., where she would be responsible for coordinating air traffic for VIP flights, including those carrying the President of the United States and other high-ranking government officials. The assignment represented exactly the kind of challenging and meaningful work that she had dreamed of when she first decided to join the military. General Thornton had played a significant role in making this assignment possible. His recommendation letters and personal advocacy had carried considerable weight with the selection boards responsible for officer assignments. More importantly, his mentorship had helped Sarah develop the confidence and leadership skills necessary to excel in such a demanding position. During the graduation reception, General Thornton presented Sarah with a special gift, a leather-bound journal that had belonged to her grandfather during the war. The journal contained Miguel's handwritten notes and observations from his military service, including detailed accounts of some of the missions that General Thornton had described. During their conversations at Ramstein, reading her grandfather's own words about his wartime experiences provided Sarah with a deeper understanding of the man whose legacy had shaped her own military career. Miguel had written extensively about his responsibilities to his fellow soldiers and his commitment to serving his country with honor and distinction. His reflections on leadership and courage provided guidance that Sarah knew would be valuable throughout her own military service. The journal also contained personal entries about Miguel's hopes for his family's future and his dreams of the opportunities that military service might provide for subsequent generations. Reading these passages, Sarah realized that her grandfather had understood that his wartime sacrifices were an investment in possibilities that he might never live to see realized. General Thornton had also arranged for Sarah to meet with several other senior officers who had known her grandfather or had served in similar circumstances during World War II. These encounters provided her with additional perspectives on Miguel's character and contributions, reinforcing her understanding of the high standards that she needed to maintain as his descendant. One particularly meaningful conversation occurred with a retired colonel who had served as an enlisted man in Miguel's unit during the final months of the war in Europe. The colonel shared stories about Miguel's leadership style and his concern for the welfare of younger soldiers. He described Miguel as someone who had earned respect through his actions rather than his rank, and who had consistently demonstrated the kind of moral courage that was essential for military effectiveness. These conversations helped Sarah understand that her grandfather's influence had extended far beyond his heroic actions. During the mission that had saved General Thornton's life, Miguel had been recognized by his contemporaries as an exceptional soldier, whose example had inspired others to perform at higher levels. This realization gave Sarah a deeper appreciation for the responsibility she carried as his granddaughter and as a military officer. As Sarah prepared to begin her new assignment at Andrews Air Force Base, she reflected on the remarkable series of events that had led to this moment. What had begun as a routine tarmac duty assignment had evolved into a life-changing discovery about her family history and a complete transformation of her career trajectory. She understood now that her grandfather's legacy was not just about individual heroism, but about the ongoing commitment to service that connected military families across generations. Her own military career was part of a continuing story that honored the sacrifices of previous generations while building foundations for future service members. The scholarship fund that General Thornton had established in Miguel's name had grown significantly, providing educational opportunities for dozens of military families. Sarah had become actively involved in administering the fund, helping to select recipients and mentor young people who were considering military service themselves. Her story had also been featured in several military publications and veterans organizations' newsletters, inspiring other young service members to research their own family military history and to take pride in their heritage. Sarah had received letters from soldiers around the world who had been motivated by her experience to pursue their own career goals with renewed determination. As she stood at the beginning of what promised to be a distinguished military career. Sarah carried with her the knowledge that every assignment, no matter how routine it might appear, contained the potential for extraordinary discoveries and life-changing experiences. The lesson she had learned from her encounter with General Thornton was that remaining open to unexpected opportunities and maintaining excellence in routine duties could lead to rewards that exceeded any reasonable expectations. The tarmac at Ramstein Air Base, where this remarkable journey had begun, remained a special place in Sarah's memory. She knew that she would always remember the moment when a retired general's dramatic reaction to seeing her face had opened the door to understanding her family's military heritage and discovering her own potential for service and leadership. In the United States Air Force,